stadium was empty, save for the distant hum of the city beyond. Ronaldo, ever the perfectionist, had stayed late for extra training, determined to master the new move he'd been working on. The floodlights bathed the pitch in a harsh, sterile glow, but beyond their reach, the world was swallowed by darkness. A darkness so dense it seemed to pulse with its own life, pressing in on the edges of the light like a living thing, poised to consume everything in its path. As Ronaldo started his drills, a strange sensation settled over him. An inexplicable, creeping unease, like a cold breath whispering against the nape of his neck. He paused, his breath hitching as he glanced around. The stands were silent, an ocean of empty seats stretching into the abyss, their shadows yawning like gaping mouths ready to devour him whole. The air was unnervingly still, heavy as if the night itself was holding its breath, waiting, watching. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the sensation as mere fatigue, and resumed his practice. But the feeling clung to him, growing stronger, more insistent. As he dribbled the ball, the turf beneath his feet felt wrong, almost alive. The grass seemed to quiver, as if something was stirring just beneath the surface, straining to break free. Each touch of the ball sent tremors up his legs, like the ground itself was reacting to his every move, whispering secrets he couldn't quite grasp. The ball, once an extension of his will, began to act erratically, bouncing unpredictably, spinning out of control, defying his commands with a strange, rebellious energy. Out of the corner of his eye, Ronaldo caught a flicker of movement in the stand. His heart skipped a beat, and he froze, every muscle tense. He turned slowly, eyes scanning the empty rows. Nothing. Just the vacant seats, their shadows now impossibly long, stretching toward him as if drawn by some unseen force. He could have sworn he saw something. Flash of white, figure, but now it was gone, swallowed by the encroaching darkness. Trying to shake off the growing sense of dread, Ronaldo focused on the ball at his feet, but the air seemed to thicken around him, pressing down like an invisible weight, making it harder to breathe. The distant hum of the city faded, replaced by a low, droning sound, like the murmur of 1,000 voices just out of earshot, whispering in a language he couldn't understand. His chest tightened, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, his instincts screaming that something was very, very wrong. Then he heard it, a whisper. Faint at first, barely more than a breath of sound, but unmistakable. It echoed around him, bouncing off the empty stands, slipping through the beams of the floodlights like a ghost. Ronaldo. The voice was soft, almost playful, but there was a chilling edge to it, a malevolent undertone that made his blood run cold. He spun around, desperately searching for the source, but the pitch was deserted. The shadows seemed to writhe and stretch, forming unnatural shapes that danced at the edge of his vision, always just out of sight. His pulse quickened, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. Ronaldo, play. Panic clawed at the edges of his mind, irrational yet overwhelming. He started to back away, but the pitch felt endless, stretching out in all directions like a vast, inescapable void. The goalposts loomed in the distance, twisted and warped, their shapes shifting in the flickering light. The shadows deepened, coiling around him like serpents, tightening like a noose. Then he saw it. Standing at the center of the pitch, where he had been mere moments ago, was a figure. Tall and gaunt, it was draped in darkness, its form barely visible beneath a tattered, flowing cloak that seemed to be woven from the shadows themselves. The fabric moved with an eerie fluidity, as if alive, whispering secrets of its own. Its face was hidden, shrouded in impenetrable darkness, but its eyes, they glowed a sickly yellow, piercing through the gloom, locking onto Ronaldo with a hunger that made his stomach churn. The figure didn't move, but the shadows around it did, writhing and undulating like a living thing. Massive serpents slithering across the pitch, their scales scraping against the ground with a sound that sent shivers down his spine. The whispers grew louder, filling Ronaldo's ears, drowning out his thoughts, echoing in his mind like a maddening chorus. Come play, Ronaldo, come play forever. The figure began to advance, its movements slow and deliberate, savoring the moment like a predator toying with its prey. Its feet barely touched the ground, hovering just above the turf as it glided forward, the shadows creeping closer, their shapes twisting into monstrous forms, faces with hollow eyes and gaping mouths, hands with clawed fingers reaching out for him. Ronaldo's legs felt like a lead, his body paralyzed by terror as the figure closed the distance, the air around him growing colder, heavier, suffocating. The figure's eyes never wavered, those glowing orbs burning into his soul, stripping away his courage, his resolve, leaving only fear. Desperate, Ronaldo turned and fled, his breath ragged, heart pounding in his chest like a drumbeat of doom. But no matter how fast he ran, the shadows kept pace, the whispers chasing him, taunting him, urging him to surrender. The pitch stretched out endlessly before him, a labyrinth of darkness and despair, the exit always just out of reach. Finally, he reached the edge of the pitch, where the floodlights flickered ominously, casting long, jittery shadows. But as he crossed into the light, his foot caught on something. A root, a bump in the turf, and he stumbled, falling to the ground with a cry of despair. The whispers roared in his ears, a cacophony of voices all screaming his name. He looked up, and there it was, the figure looming over him, its glowing eyes drilling into his very being, stripping him of hope. The figure reached out, its hand emerging from the cloak. Twisted skeletal claw, its bones sharp and blackened as if burned by some ancient fire. As it touched Ronaldo's shoulder, a shock of cold surged through his body, freezing him in place. The whispers faded, replaced by a deafening silence that pressed against his ears like a physical force. The figure leaned in close, its breath cold and foul, reeking of decay and despair, and whispered one final word: "Mine." The lights flickered and went out, plunging the stadium into total darkness. When they came back on, Ronaldo was lying on the pitch, alone. His body ached, and his mind was a haze of terror, the memory of that touch still burning on his shoulder like an icy brand. He scrambled to his feet, looking around wildly, but the figure was gone. The shadows were just shadows, the whispers silenced, but the fear was still there, gnawing at him, refusing to let go. Grabbed his gear and bolted from the stadium, the echo of his own footsteps the only sound breaking the eerie silence. He swore to himself he'd never stay late again. But even as he sped away in his car, the empty streets flashing by in a blur, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was with him, lurking just out of sight, watching, waiting for the next time he stepped onto the field. And as he lay in bed that night, the silence of his room broken only by his own shallow breaths, a soft, familiar whisper brushed against his ear, sending a shock of cold terror through his veins. "Ronaldo, come play." If you found yourself alone in an eerie stadium like Ronaldo. Have you ever felt like you were being watched when you were alone? How did you react? What do you think the shadowy figure in the stadium represents? Would you continue practicing alone in a place like this after such an encounter? Do you believe in haunted sports arenas or stadiums? Why or why not? How would you handle hearing a voice call your name in the dead of night? Have you ever experienced something paranormal while playing a sport? Share your story. What would you do if you felt like the ground beneath you was alive? Do you think Ronaldo will ever return to the stadium? Why or why not? What do you think happened to Ronaldo in the end? Was it all in his head, or was something truly supernatural? Play.
That's for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe our channel. And if you want us to tell your stories to our viewers, feel free to send your stories, incident or experiences to our email. Just try to make the grammar neat and understandable. See you in the next video. Take care. Goodbye.